I said last time.
Still got some
You live too close. You should.
cardboard on the floors and so
Nice to see you on the other side.
oh yeah.
How was it?
Pretty impressive.
Yeah,
It cracked me.
very European, but it's for a different city.
As always.
You couldn't even get a good.
Oh, is that right? I didn't know. It's true. I didn't know it was one at all. I was in an anthropology class one time and it wasn't. Or tried to explain to the rest of us how offensive it was to me. And we know baby was walk. Just bothered me.
And how it fits you in there such a easy stand. I gave him hell, all yours.
Good evening. Call to order our regular meeting of the City of Sonoma Planning Commission. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Dambach,
Here.
Commissioner O'Neill,
Here.
Commissioner Willers,
Here.
Commissioner WIRICK,
Here.
Vice Chair Barbose,
Here.
Chair Barnett,
Present.
and alternate Commissioner Nugent.
Here.
All right. And next item is the approval of the agenda. Would anyone like to suggest a change in the agenda tonight? Seeing none, we'll move on. We need to have the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Conlon, would you like to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Chair Barnett. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I see you're pretty 54 also.
Thank you. Okay, at this point, is there any correspondence, late correspondence that needs to be brought to our attention, Matthew?
There was no late correspondence received.
Okay, thank you. At this point, the meeting is open to comments from the public. These comments would be limited to items that are not on tonight's agenda. Anything you have to say about the agenda items will come up as we take up each agenda item. Is there anyone who would like to make a comment on something not on tonight's agenda? Seeing none,
Oh, and through the chair, I'd like to note too that there are no hands raised on Zoom.
thank you, Mr. Corbet. The next item is calendar, the consent calendar. We don't have anything on the consent calendar tonight. So the first agenda item of business is a public hearing, 5.1. Approve possible action to adopt a resolution approving the wine tasting use permit of Kim Bandel and Daniel Casabonne to operate a wine tasting facility at 596 First Street East. Assuming we have a staff report. Aha. Changing of the guard. Anything I can do. Now you see the problem.
Good evening, commissioners.
Keep you on your toes.
All right. Whoa, that was fancy. Didn't know I did that. The item before us this evening is a wine tasting use permit at 596 First Street East. We've done several of these lately. We don't need to go over the background probably. This location is outside of the prod, so the numerical limitations don't apply to this one. I should have done a slide for the actual proposed project. The project is proposing to use the former Don and Sons office space and and using a small 196 square foot portion of the interior to do private tastings. There is a lovely little backside patio, but they are not proposing to use that at this time. The site is a little bit constrained with residential on the east side and the church and nursery school to the south. So they're proposing a pretty limited scope wine tasting use permit to fit within the neighborhood.
Can you see that picture one more time?
You can see the picture, and I'm so sorry. I was rushing and thought that I had more information here, but there's the site.
And I'm just trying to envision which side of the street is this on?
This is the First Street east side, and so when you walk in, there's a little lobby area that they would be using for tastings.
No, I understand, but
It's down the street from the women's club on the same side.
It's on the same side?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
It's the corner.
Right, yeah, the corner.
Yeah, the east side. Okay, thank you.
And so I think probably the most notable thing about this project is that this is our first project that will have the new requirements for bike parking. So as a condition of approval, we'll require 2 long-term bike parking spots and 2 short-term.
This is the building on the corner?
Correct.
Used to be wine business something or other. It also has one of the most significant trees in the neighborhood on that corner.
Yeah, it has a parking lot in the back, which I do have somewhat of a picture of. So there's more than enough parking for the site, for the office, and for the tasting room. And we have the findings of approval. As I noted earlier, they're requesting limited hours, and so that is in the conditions of approval. So they're requesting appointment only from 11 to 4 p.m. And staff's recommendation is to approve the wine tasting use permit, subject to findings and conditions of approval.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for staff,
I have a question.
please?
I noticed several times that it was reiterated that they only intend to have indoor tastings, yet when you look at the actual site plans, there's an outdoor tasting planned. So any comments around that? I mean,
When they originally submitted their application, there was an outdoor spot, and then it was amended, the narrative was amended, and the conditions of approval are reflected in the resolution and would be part of the record, so it would not be allowed.
thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, is the applicant here tonight? No? Okay. Anybody online, Matthew?
There are currently no hands raised on Zoom.
Okay, well, we'll bring it back to the commission then for discussion and any motions. Who'd like to start?
Through the chair.
Yes.
You should formally open it to the public comment, and then formally close it.
All right. I now open the public hearing to the public. Anyone want to make comment on it?
No hands raised on Zoom.
No hands are in, but we do have one speaker from the audience.
Thank you. Good evening. Tom Conlon speaking as an individual just now. I wanted to say I appreciate the bike parking addition to your conditions of approval. And I think that's not just conditions, but it's part of now the new application process. So I just wanted to thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Yes, it is indeed. All right. Any other hands? No, you say no hands raised online.
That's correct.
I will close the public comment, bring it back to the commission for discussion and a motion.
Question, did I see somewhere in a past slide that this was the 24th of wine tasting room applications?
So we currently have 24. This location does not count towards the 25 total because it's located outside the Plaza Retail Overlay District. So the limitation is really just limited to the immediate plaza and a little bit outside. So the corner of Patton and First Street is outside of that. So you can have unlimited tasting rooms if you wanted outside of that area.
So, refresh my memory, 25 is the cap
Correct.
within the one, okay, thank you.
And Christina, could you clarify what the zoning designation of this property is?
I can check. I don't remember off the top of my head.
Well, the reason I'm inquiring is clearly it's a permitted use in whatever zone it is, I'm assuming.
I believe it's commercial, but I can double check.
Yeah, well, it's across the street from commercial use.
Yeah, and in Patton, the fire station is mixed use, but it's a little bit of an island. Oh my gosh.
Well, we don't know how to take that expression. Is the, oh my gosh, the technology is failing?
The browser is trying to get me to establish my recent browsing history. And
I see, okay.
wants to customize my experience.
It is commercial.
It is commercial? Thank you.
This is why I like having my other computer.
Okay, anyone else wish to, okay, please go ahead.
Christina, not so much for this property, but can you re-educate me on our parking requirements for tasting rooms?
I can. I believe it's 1 space per 300 square feet. All right, my computer is acting up. I usually have 2.
Mine is acting up also.
It's not going to be on this one because it just got updated. I'd have to check the ordinance. I don't believe we changed it. I think it's 1 per 300. And that's what I have in the staff report, so I'm going with that. And this is like 600 square feet, so they just need a half a space. And there's no outside seating proposed. Yeah, 1 per 300.
All right, further, anyone else? Anyone would like to make a motion?
I motion to approve item 5.1, consideration, discussion, and possible action to adopt resolution for approving wine tasting permit, WTUP 23-2.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Roll call?
Commissioner Dambach,
Yes.
Commissioner Nugent.
Aye.
Use your microphone.
Aye.
Commissioner O'Neill,
Yes.
Commissioner Willers,
Yes.
Commissioner Wyrick,
Yes.
Vice Chair Barbose,
Yes.
and Chair Barnett.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion carries unanimously.
All right, thank you. We had 5.2 and 5.3 on the agenda. Both of these agenda items have been canceled, and I assume they will be rescheduled for a subsequent future meeting. This brings us to Section 6, items for discussion. And the first item is item 6.1, the Sonoma County Active Transportation Plan. What? Mary Miller is in attendance at our meeting tonight. It's nice to see you again, Mary. How have you been? Okay, well, good for you. Glad to have you here. All right, this is going to be a presentation of someone from the Transportation Authority. Am I correct?
Yes, just give us 1 second.
All right.
Dana, can you hear us?
Everybody's muted.
Is she a panelist?
There she is.
There she is.
Good evening. We've just opened this agenda item. So we're looking forward to your presentation. Please introduce yourselves and tell us what it is you have in mind. Oop, we've just lost our...
So Dana, can you still talk?
Because it has to be on this for Zoom. Let's just try it again, see if she, because we keep hearing us.
I could hear you, Dana. So apparently this did not work as we had planned. So I have the PowerPoint, but I do not have you do not have the ability to speak apparently to that PowerPoint. So that's not visual to them. So can you give me like 5 minutes to figure this out, and I'll switch your agenda item to another item so that maybe I can talk to IT in the back for a second? Is that okay? Can you hear me? Us on the line. Oh, sorry. Yes, I didn't know if you were asking us or the commission. Yes, I'm asking you. Yeah. All right. Thank you. Yeah. Just give us a second.
Is it possible to let them share the screen?
I'm gonna ask them in the back.
Can you send it to them?
They gave it to me actually.
Then they should have it, right? Then they just need to share.
That's what I gotta make sure.
Okay.
Can they share?
And if not, what we can do is email them the PowerPoint.
It's theirs.
They have it.
Yeah. All right, Dana, Taylor. Yes. Yes. Taylor, can you go ahead and share your screen with the PowerPoint? I sure can. Thank you. It's okay.
While Taylor's pulling that up, I'll just give a quick introduction. Good evening, Commission. My name is Dana Teray. I'm a transportation planner at the Sonoma County Transportation Authority, and we are managing the update of our countywide active transportation plan. And with that update, we are including updates to 7 of the local jurisdiction plans, including the city of Sonoma. So we've contracted with Fair and Peers to bring their expertise on the update of this plan. And I will just hand it over to Taylor, and I'll be here if any questions come up for me.
Thanks, Dana. All right. So I have a brief presentation to introduce you to kind of what our goals are with the active transportation plan, starting with what is an active transportation plan. And then I do have some slides towards the end, which kind of prompt discussion. I know the commission format isn't quite exactly set up for a discussion, but you can, share your thoughts and comments and questions, and same with audience members. So this is the first of 3 meetings that will come present to you. So at this milestone, we're kind of introducing you to the active transportation plan. And this active transportation refers to human-powered modes of travel, like walking, bicycling, using mobility devices or scooters or any of the other kind of micro-mobility options that are available now. And the active transportation plan really focuses on increasing access to these different modes, both through infrastructure projects as well as through supportive programs like education, enforcement. And it's important to have an active transportation plan because by implementing these ideas, it can enhance quality of life, and it allows for prioritizing, which projects may be the most important when we have limited dollars. But also really importantly is that it's in order to be eligible for a lot of state and regional funding for bicycling, walking projects, you need to have a plan like this in place. It's usually a grant funding requirement. And so the plan here, we are creating this plan for all ages and abilities. We know this graphic is showing there's different types of bike people out there who different ways people interact with bicycles. And you can see the biggest chart there, the biggest section, 60% of people are interested but concerned. So there are a lot of people who are interested in bicycling, but it's just not comfortable for them. because the roadways aren't really set up for them to do that now. And so that's kind of a starting point for this plan, is we know that that's the biggest section of the population. And so we want to make those concerns go away and the interest turn into people riding bicycles more often. And then the same is true for walking. There's a smaller portion of the population that is concerned about walking, but the same is true, and we want to make these modes accessible to all ages and abilities. So in this plan, we will, do our best to incorporate industry best practices, and this includes, since the last bicycle and pedestrian plans at the county level, there are new designs for bikeways and new treatments for pedestrian facilities. We will think about both on-street and off-street paths and bike facilities. Sonoma has one of the best examples in the county of your off-street multimodal path. The street crossings and intersections are one of the most important places we pay attention to for safety and comfort. And then, as I mentioned, this is it is not strictly a bicycle and pedestrian plan, but includes other micromobility and kind of emerging technology modes. We have a partner on our team, Professor Kevin Fang at Sonoma State University, who is an expert in this topic. We also will think about different ways to implement plans. So there are the concept of a quick build project. You can sometimes implement a version of a long-term project with just like paint and temporary barriers, and then go back later once you get full funding. But you don't have to wait to make some changes. And then last is amenities to support pedestrian and bicycle experience. So this is like bike parking, for pedestrians when they get to a transit stop, having shelter, shade, trash cans, seating, etc. So amenities as well as the main facilities. And this just gets at the fact that the facilities, again, if we're going to support all ages and abilities to be comfortable, we want to focus on what we call low stress facilities. And typically these are bicycle facilities that are separated from cars. So instead of just striped, painted lanes on a street, it's physically divided or a completely separate path, or something that just has more space, even if there's no physical barrier. And for pedestrian facilities, this plan will look at sidewalks, crosswalks, but also kind of new devices that we've been rolling out. I know Jennifer shared that you've been including some flashing beacons on Broadway recently, but also things like signal timing changes are all part of the toolbox for this plan. There is a big component of our scope of work that will focus on community engagement. And we have 3 rounds of community engagement. We're about to really kick off the first of 3, where we're collecting broad input on, what is your experience today bicycling and walking? How would you like it to be better? And then funding and implementation. So as we're coming up with a list of projects, we really want to be thinking about what funding sources are available to kind of match with those different project types. And that includes county funding, but also state, regional, and federal funds. And I won't walk through all of this, but just our scope of work, I mentioned the first step is really to understand what's out there today. And at the county level, this presents some challenges because the age and quality of data for different jurisdictions really varies across the county. So that's where we look for your help and community members' help to match up what the data tells us is out there with what is actually out there and what your experience is. So once we have the foundation established, we have a few different technical kind of analyses that we've gotten started on. I'll show you a few of those today, and will form the basis of some of our recommendations. The engagement and coordination that I mentioned, in it there are 7 other jurisdictions that are updating their plan, and we'll go to each of their usually planning commission or city council meetings, kind of in concurrence with when we come to you. Once we have then we'll have our list of projects and programs, and the funding and implementation steps to match up with those. And then finally the draft and final plans before SCTA board approval. This is really here for your reference to look back at. I'm not going to walk through the whole plan, but most important is that we will have a county-wide plan, and then each of the 7 jurisdictions will have a plan that is kind of a volume 2. And the reason we are really excited to do these together is because most of the jurisdictions in Sonoma County are relatively small, and people want to walk and bike across, city boundaries. And so we don't want to stop our planning at the city line just because that is a kind of jurisdictional, geography, but not actually a lived experience geography for how people move about. And so this will allow us to think about how bicycle facilities and, pedestrian experiences connect across city lines and throughout the county. So we do have draft vision goals and objectives for the countywide plan, and I am sharing them today. We can adjust these for the local plan if this doesn't quite align, with Sonoma's vision and experience. So I'll just give a quick second for you to read this. And then paired with that vision, we have 3 main goals for the plan, and there's quick descriptions of each of those. I'll give you again, quick second to read it. And these goals and the vision really do come kind of directly from the countywide transportation plan, the broader transportation plan, but obviously tailored to kind of active transportation components. But again, this is the countywide vision and goals, and this is still draft and could change slightly, but we could apply the same vision and goals for Sonoma or adjust it slightly for the local plan. So something to think about in your comments. And then as I mentioned, kind of the countywide and local coordination. We'll have regular meetings through SCTA's countywide bicycle pedestrian advisory committee. And then we have milestone updates to established SCTA, RCPA committees. This is one of the milestone updates to the local advisory bodies, and then we'll have board and council presentations. In addition, kind of again, concurrently, we have our engagement components. So at the same time, this is our first visit to you to talk about kind of existing conditions, needs, and opportunities. We will do community engagement September through November of this fall, and then we'll have our draft projects, policies, and programs, bring those back to you in the spring and reach out to the community again in spring, summer, and then wrapping this all up next fall, winter. Just a slightly different view of the schedule to see kind of where we're at, and Again, this is right at the beginning of our engagement. We're well into our technical analysis. So you can return to this schedule at any point. We also have a draft website that will go up shortly, and you can see the schedule there. So this is the last portion of the presentation where I want to show some of our kind of existing conditions and technical analysis. And I want to reiterate that this is really based on kind of the best data we have available to us, but we know that some of it is wrong at this point because the facilities are constantly changing. You all have recently updated facilities, and so this is where we want to hear from you, and we will reach out to community members to understand more. But this first map is showing the existing and proposed bicycle network. So the existing Class 1 means it's an off-street facility, a dedicated pathway. Class 2 is a striped on-street bicycle lane, and Class 3 just means that there's a share marking painted onto the road, but no kind of designated space on the street. And a Class 4 is where it's protected, which there aren't any in Sonoma or kind of the immediate vicinity. And these proposed facilities are from the most recent bicycle plan. I'm happy to come back to these maps during the question and answer period. The second map is one of our first technical analyses. So this is called this map shows level of traffic stress, which basically means how stressful is it to ride a bicycle on a roadway, with 1 and 2 being lower stress, 3 moderate stress, and 4 is the highest stress facility. And the yellow highlight shows part of the high injury network. This data, high injury network, means that these are the sections of the roadway network with the highest number of collisions. And this high injury network was calculated based on collisions between 2016 and 2020. So it's possible that in the last 3 years, or 2.5, there haven't been many collisions on these sections, but historically, that's not what the trends showed us. Additionally, a lot of the underlying data that helps us determine the level of stress is older. So Broadway, for example, we know has recently had bicycle lanes added, and flashing beacons are being added, and those are things that will reduce the stress level. So if through conversations we learn that folks think with those additions that this is actually less than a level 4, then we can change that in our analysis. And then the last map here is these are kind of preliminary priority pedestrian zones. And this is a very, very first cut at where we would potentially want to focus, investment in pedestrian facilities. And how we came up with this designation is it's an overlap of the highest density, either residential or employment areas, with proximity to schools and libraries. But if in Sonoma, for example, there are other very important destinations like the plaza, those are other things we could designate as an important destination to overlap employment and residential zones. The plaza, obviously, it's already highlighted on one side, but to the northeast, there's just not enough residential or employment density to have it show up here. But again, that's something we could customize based on your feedback. So lastly, kind of community engagement questions. These are the questions we're going to be asking when we go to pop-up events over the next couple months, and on our website, which will be available probably in the next week or so. For now, you can also learn more about the project on SCTA's webpage, which will eventually redirect you to the main project webpage. So that's what I have today. Happy to answer any questions or hear your comments.
Thank you, Taylor. Again, so this is focused on our active transportation plan. We participated with the county in the previous version, and so we were looking to continue that participation. This is separate from our circulation element that we are starting with the general plan. That being said, we would still feed information to this, as well as take information that's collected through this process for the circulation element itself. So I just wanted to reiterate that this is happening at the same time concurrently, but not in a vacuum. So we will look to make sure that we are providing them the most up-to-date information as they move forward with their technical analysis and before it goes out more so to the public for their community engagement activities.
All right, thank you, and thanks to Taylor and her associates. At this point, I will open up to any questions, specifically questions, and then we can move on to comments once we've gotten public comment. Any questions per se? Yes.
Thank you. I have a few questions. The first question kind of refers to what Jennifer was alluding to, and I know that the general plan will take a longer period of time. So I just want to make sure I understand that the idea is taking some of this ATP plan and building it into the circulation element?
Correct. So the circulation element is the bigger, broader policies. An ATP plan is typically an implementation plan of broader policies, which is what they were referencing on some of their goals. So that would be the idea, is the things that we identify through this community engagement and maybe set some goals around active transportation would then also feed into that circulation element.
Okay, thanks. And the second question is, it's actually on the agenda later, is I'm wondering if the Climate Action Committee is talking or having input into the SCTA, because some of the things that they're advocating could be brought into this plan. So I don't know if they're aware, and I don't know if you facilitate that.
I will facilitate that aspect of it. So either as a commission, but of course as individuals, everyone, we want to participate. The item itself would not go to Climate Action Commission as an actual approval body. But of course, filling them in on everything that we're doing is my goal.
I have one last question. With regard to the pedestrian planning zones, they just seem like blue blobs. So is that, so I know some of those are chosen based on information, but this is kind of a comment. It seems odd that Chase Street needs a pedestrian plan. So I'm just curious, will these get a little more meat on the bone? I don't know what that means for a pedestrian plan. The bike plans are pretty straightforward. This is heavily geared toward bicycle safety, but the pedestrian plans are a little bit more vague. Thank you.
Taylor, do you want to respond on how the blobs were created, and then how you in turn to take pedestrian pedestrian priority zones into future recommendations?
Yeah, no, they are definitely blobs right now. And we don't plan to associate them with specific streets. Instead, it would be, more similar to like an overlay zone kind of thing. It's not going to officially become one, but just in the sense that anytime like a street gets, repaved, for example, in the zone, it would, rather than putting in kind of just a standard, striped sidewalk, you might upgrade to like an even higher higher visibility treatment that includes, you know, flashing bulbs or, you know, kind of leading pedestrian intervals where pedestrians go before traffic. Or you might consider in the design to add bulb outs at a corner. And so it's kind of like a trigger when you're doing any sort of new roadway project, that anything in that blob might receive a higher visibility pedestrian treatment. You could use the priority zones that way. You could also, it might like bump projects up in your capital improvement plan, capital improvement program. So it's really a prioritization tool, but it's not to say we need to study pedestrian needs within every street within that blob. It's kind of more of a prioritization tool. And then the last thing is, yeah, you mentioned a specific street. And if you think anything in here doesn't warrant that extra attention, then that is part of this tweaking stage of the plan where we can kind of shrink the size of the blobs in some places and grow them in others.
About Chase, just as a parent at Presswood, that's one of the main ways into Presswood, and there's currently no crosswalks. So the kids very regularly, you will just see them looking and darting across, and there's no signage. So I'm guessing that's why it's on there.
Thank you. Thanks for the explanations.
Okay, go ahead.
So one of the intersections where we've had the highest pedestrian, bicycle, car accidents is the Verano Highway 12. And I'm not seeing that it has even a blue blob. So I'm wondering where that's incorporated here, because we know that that's a huge risk area. And I know it's, we can see it there. It is outside the city limits, maybe is in county, but still, I think it needs to get highlighted as that's an area where we've had fatalities and numerous fatalities. So that's one that I think is really missing. I'd like to see that.
Is that a question or a comment?
I'd like to see how it's addressed there. So yeah, it's a question, but it's also, if it's not being addressed, it will be more than a comment. It will be a request. That's my first question. I'll stop there.
You can barely tell, but it is highlighted as the high injury network. Taylor, can you circle that? Yep, thank you. So it is highlighted in the yellow. But this goes where maybe for the city of Sonoma, this is part of our discussion later. So I'm going to throw this out there and then we can discuss this. Maybe pedestrian priority zones aren't actually high density residential and where people work, but where people go and from where they go. Mm-hmm. So to schools, to the grocery store, to the plaza, and do we have paths of travel for them to get there? And those can be pedestrian priority zones based on lack of actual resources to them. But we can have a discussion more about that.
Okay. The next one where I would like to see attention is the east-north side of the plaza going up the Mission, because that connects to Depot Park, it connects to the Vintage House, and it connects to the bike path and the Overlook Trail. And so I think that area really does need to have some real concentrated plans for how bikes or pedestrians or runners, let's include us, get from the plaza area up through that area, especially knowing that we've got the Casa Grande parking lot emptying into that intersection. So I'd like to see that included. So that's the north and east side of the plaza on up to the bike path. Questions. Okay. How will we provide input for beyond Sonoma as an island and for the county roads that all of us bicyclists, runners, people connect to? How are we going to treat that as a cohesive plan as opposed to just the city of Sonoma as an island?
That's a great question. And so two ways. One is, so all of these technical kind of analyses that I'm showing you are done at the county level first, and then we'll refine them for our local jurisdictions. But so the same kind of level of traffic stress and preliminary priority zones, pedestrian zones that I'm showing you, these will cover unincorporated county as well, partially because it's part of the whole county, but also unincorporated county is one of our 7 jurisdictions that we're making a plan for. And so the same level of attention is being paid to county facilities as well. In addition to kind of thinking about how the network works at the local level, we're also looking at regional routes. And so this is like slightly longer trips, and connections between jurisdictions, including between Sonoma and unincorporated county all the way up Highway 12. And so are there kind of key connections or origins and destination pairs where we want to prioritize a super high quality, low stress facility, like an off-street facility or a protected facility all the way? So those are the two ways that this will extend, beyond the borders here of Sonoma as a city. And we're hoping it will all kind of integrate seamlessly.
How will we see what is happening in those unincorporated areas, and how can we participate in that?
So there will be, just like this milestone update, we will present a milestone update to unincorporated counties. Dana, maybe you can help me here what the group is for unincorporated county that we're presenting to.
Yeah, so the unincorporated county has it's the Sonoma County Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee. And so we will be bringing that, they meet regularly, and we will be bringing an update to them in mid-October. So that is a good place to, if there's particular areas you're interested in the unincorporated county to tune into. But I would just add that, I think if there's things just on the fringes of the city of Sonoma, comments on those here can definitely be taken.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's like the first official update that we'll be giving on unincorporated county. But we also, in our both of our primary engagement pathways or kind of methods of engagement are going to be jurisdiction kind of agnostic. So one is the website I mentioned will have a map that you can comment anywhere in Sonoma County on any road. And so that will be a great place to put your comments for kind of unincorporated county as well as for Sonoma. And then we'll also, when we come, I think one of the possible or kind of potential in-person opportunities we identified is the Harvest market in Sonoma, and we'll have like a physical paper map where you can also put your comments, and we'll make sure it'll include at least this extent for Sonoma. So there's kind of the portions of the county roads right outside the city limits.
Okay, any other questions?
Yes, a question. How does the proposed 8th Street East bike path that's supposed to be connecting to Highway 12, I don't know the status of that right now, but is there any report out on that and what is the status of that plan and how is that going to play into this?
I do not know the status of the plan other than we have it recorded, so that's the good news, as a proposed facility. But that is certainly something, if no one knows the current status, we can look into as part of this plan.
Dana, I think this would be something that we'd be interested in knowing what the status is of the implementation of the just outside of our jurisdiction.
Yeah, thank you. And we can work with the county, I believe it's County Regional Parks, working on that, and we can coordinate with them and get more detail on where that is.
All right, any other questions at this time? We'll do comments after the public comment period. Okay, I just have one question, which has to do with one of your PowerPoint pages referred to the active plan as it pertains to technology. My basic question is, are you envisioning the use of electric scooters or other kinds of motorized vehicles in this network that's being contemplated? Or is this a human-powered plan only?
That's a good question. Yeah, we do say human-powered. I think the reality is that you can buy an electric-powered scooter today or bicycle that requires little human power, but some. And we want to think really carefully about, where those devices belong on local streets, county streets, etc. Currently, most jurisdictions allow electric scooters and bicycles to use bike lanes, but not allowed on the sidewalk. And so, for example, if there's concerns about that, that's kind of something we could talk about being part of the programmatic element of this plan and education of where those devices belong. And yeah.
Well, thank you. I do believe it needs considerable further discussion. And because some of these electrically motorized vehicles actually can move quite swiftly and pose in their own way, particularly to an elderly population. In the city of Sonoma is increasingly an elderly population, a safety risk. And I think that there is not necessarily a perfect compatibility between motorized conveyance that goes 10 or 15 miles an hour and someone who's walking at 3 or 4 miles an hour. And so I would love to see more consideration of that. Okay, I think we'll now open this up to public comment. So I will open the public comment.
This is a fun night for me here. Appreciate it. Tom Conlon, again, speaking as an individual. I'm a many years bike rider. In fact, I learned to ride a bicycle here in Sonoma, even though I didn't live here at the time. So I'm thrilled to have this before us tonight. Excited that the county and the city are working together on this. I think that makes a lot of sense. As we saw with the map, we have our community definitely moves around, leaves the border of the city. I have a couple of questions. Specifically, by the way, excellent questions from your board tonight. I think that's going to add to a good feedback from the staff and the consultant. I'm curious how you're going to be doing outreach and engagement, especially to those populations that are likely to adopt whatever we implement. And the way I think about it is there are those folks that are already risking bicycling, myself included, kids included, workers included, many of which who don't speak English, visitors, because a lot of people come to Sonoma, rent a bicycle, go to the hotel, borrow a bicycle, and may be lost on our pathways. So I think, yes, it would be great to have engagement from somebody like me, but we need also outreach and engagement to some of these target populations. So I'll be trying to make sure those folks come to these meetings to the extent of my ability. I understand that your analysis is pretty far along, but I'm curious how the injury network will be mapped into the ultimate plan we adopt here. So, and then perhaps how the Vision Zero action plan, which is, I believe, a separate plan, which qualifies us for grant money eventually, how that fits into the range of priorities. And I understand that we're all here in the general plan circulation element update process. And, but with respect to that, if there's something that we uncover in this, frankly, we're lucky to have such a qualified consultant helping us work on this. Can we, if there's something that's currently in our existing general plan, this has to fall under, maybe we need a change to our current transportation circulation element. So I think there's a possibility for that, but if we start to run into that, I'd like the staff and the consultant to sort of suggest that to us. I don't know that that's the case. I just want to be sure we aren't waiting for these general plan to update something that might make sense sooner, particularly if there's infrastructure money available for us to spend. And finally, I appreciate the comments about the connectivity between the blobs and the need to really concentrate on how people move around the city. I don't go to all corners of the city. I go to Friedman's, I go to the store, I go to the plaza, I come here and talk to you guys. And I go, my kids back and forth to parks. All right. Thank you for taking the time to listen.
Thank you, Tom. Anyone else in attendance in the room tonight who want to speak? Do we have anyone online, Matthew?
Yes, we have one hand raised on Zoom. All right, Eris, you should begin.
I'm Eris Weaver. I'm the Executive Director of the Sonoma County Bicycle Coalition. I have a couple of comments. First, I would like to address a question that one of the commissioners asked. I'm actually listening to the meeting on my phone while I'm riding my bike home. So I didn't see the name of who it was, but about those, the spaces in between cities and who's attending to those. And that is something that the Bike Coalition is watching very closely, because connectivity across the whole county is something that's important to us. So while your entity as Planning Commission has to focus on within the city, we're looking at those interconnections. So there's folks on that. The other thing that I wanted to throw out to you, I don't know, most of you commissioners, so I don't know how much time any of you spend on a bicycle or walking around town. But one of the things that we've done in some of the other jurisdictions, and that I've found folks have found really useful, in Cotati, which is where I happen to live, myself and some other local residents who walk and bike a lot, and a couple of folks from Fair and Piers and a couple of folks from the city staff, we all went on a ride around town to show people what is it. If you don't ride a bike, or you don't take the bus, or you don't walk, or you don't do whatever, it's hard. You see the world differently when you're on different conveyances. And so if you're making decisions about a walk and bike plan, but you don't really walk or bike very much, it's helpful to go out on a guided tour and experience some parts of the city the way that folks who do ride all the time do. And so that's just an offer that I'm putting out there, that if you commissioners would be interested in doing that, that I would help enlist some of my colleagues out there in Sonoma, like Mr. Conlon and Mr. Metzler and other folks that I know, and make that happen for you. That's all I got. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your comment. Anything else, Matthew?
There are no other hands raised on Zoom at the moment.
All right. Then at this point, I will close the public portion of the comments and bring it back to the commission for comments. Who would like to start? Mr. Willers.
This is interesting, and it's important to talk about. I actually have probably I'm looking at the bike plan for the entire county, and I've probably ridden almost every mile that is dotted or solid. And when I focus back to Sonoma, I think the majority of what I see in terms of areas which, and thinking about the people that are using it, the 1% versus the 60%, but we all share the same reason for utilizing a piece of transportation, a corridor of transportation, whether it's on a bike, by foot, or on a car. And in my experience, it's kind of like water, and that is for a cyclist and for someone, a pedestrian who's walking, they're not looking for the easiest way to do it. They're looking for the calmest way to do it. And so to me, the bright purple on the cycling plan, while those are major corridors and they have a lot of population next to them, they also have the most amount of potential conflict built into them. And, you know, and just as an experience, I've never ridden down Napa Street because it's foolish. You know, Spain Street to Fifth Street to Verano to Highway 12 and up the valley, that is a normal cyclist route in our community. It's not down Napa Street. And the reason is because there's so many points of conflict in terms of people pulling out of driveways from commercial businesses, the amount of traffic that moves down Highway 12, and no matter how many barriers you put up and how much green paint you put on the road, that conflict still exists. Where if we improve some of the streetways that we have that are built in the slower moving edges of town, you know, Fifth Street West is a fast moving street. It has a lot of volume on it, but it's still calmer and easier to access and convey along than Napa Street. It just is, on a bike for sure. And the same holds true for Verano. Verano's, while it's busy, is essentially quieter than Spain past Fifth Street, and certainly Napa past Fifth Street. So there are these natural networks that have worked themselves out, and they do have the populations already using them. And it to me, it just shows how people try to find the simplest way to move about that is comfortable for them, no matter what they're doing. And secondly, I think, you know, one of the primary elements of getting around in our community and beyond its borders is our roadway network that is utilized. I'm thinking of cyclists primarily, and our roadways outside of the city, especially any of the rural roadways that are comfortable to ride on are terrible to ride on at the same time. So if you want to, you know, the first step to encouraging someone to use something is to make it simple for them to use. And I'm thinking of like Ramal Road, easy access to Napa from Sonoma. But if you have teeth left after you ride that, you're lucky. And that's a simple solution. It's calm road, quiet road, people walk it, people cycle it, and it's an easy connection between Sonoma and Napa, the southern edge of Napa. And to me, that's more a priority than putting Class 1 bike lanes along Highway 12, because it offers opportunity for more people at greater distance at a lower expense. And the more we grab the low-hanging fruit, the better we improve it, instead of waiting for huge grant sums to improve a mile of bikeway along some major corridor. And I also think that the people who live in those more dense environments would prefer to walk along a quieter street than a busy street if they had the opportunity.
Thank you, Bill. Somebody else? Donna?
All right, thank you. Actually, I had some of the same comments as well, because I walk and ride everywhere as myself. And for example, I often go down from France to Andrew, and I don't like Fifth Street West. And I try to go behind the trailer park, and it would be great if there was actually a path that connected that whole pathway on that west side. Likewise, if I back up a little bit, I would agree with Jennifer. I would just see something more strategic in the way it's used, not just the technical, not just technical analysis. Impact is very important, but this idea about strategic use of pathways. And again, Jennifer brought it up, and Bill also brought it up, and I would appreciate at least the city taking that approach. And then hopefully expanding it beyond. So that's one comment. With regard to specific areas, I still find Broadway daunting. It should be in yellow. And at one point in time, there was a plan to put bumpers or medians there to also facilitate pedestrian transfer. So I know we're getting some lighting, but again, if we kind of flesh out the blobs, I think there are some opportunities to facilitate older populations or children walking across wide thoroughfares like Broadway. Fifth Street West, I believe Sonoma has a capital plan. And my understanding is that there's an initial assessment of that, especially around the Safeway transition. So a comment would be, can we incorporate, kind of flesh out whatever that capital plan is with regard to pedestrian safety as we cross that crosswalk to Safeway. And then in a longer term, I mean, this initiative is called 2050. The plan for 37 has come forward, and part of that plan may be a smart train coming into Shellville, that area. And so I guess the question is there a potential for that to be incorporated as well in this plan? And I'll leave it at that.
All right, thank you. Mr. Barbos?
I just want to add to what the last two speakers have said. And I don't really like the use of Broadway for bike paths. I mean, we put a lot of money into those, and it leads you into just an insanely dangerous intersection, and that's the plaza. I don't know what the thinking was, shuttling all these bicycles to the plaza, because as Bill has said, you can't really ride down Napa Street. Assuming you could navigate the left turn across that intersection, then you're in that problem. You can't ride a bike in the plaza legally, although people do it. So you can't get across the plaza very easily. It's very dense with all the parked cars. There's really no place to ride. So I would like to see us go back and kind of rethink, what are we doing with these bicyclists that we're shuttling up Broadway? Maybe we should divert them off of Broadway at some point. Maybe it should be one of I agree about use of side streets that are much more bike friendly, but at present that is just not workable. And that's borne out by the fact that if you sit out there and look at Broadway, you could sit there for an hour and not see a single bicycle. I mean, it's hardly ever used because it's so darn inconvenient and dangerous. So that is something I'd like to see revisited and thought through. The other thing is connectivity with the valley. And I noticed earlier when we were looking at proposed plans, there is a plan to get people from Agua Caliente off of Highway 12 on a bike path. I don't see it on the map that's currently on the screen, but I'd kind of like to know what the status, there we go, of that is, because that could be really important in moving people down the valley that are perhaps working in town and bicycling to work, or kids bicycling to school, and keeping them off of Highway 12, which is a very busy, congested spot. So connectivity with the Springs community and the Sonoma Plaza and the bike paths that we have down here is a big thing for me, and I would like to see that fully developed. I am also curious about the 8th Street East bike path that's shown on this map and has been proposed off and on for years. And I know there's some right-of-way issues. It's an old railroad right-of-way, but turns out parts of it were sold. So some people actually own it, and they don't want to give up the easement across it again. And I know that's complicated, so I kind of would like to know the status of that. So those are my comments.
Thank you. Any other, Mr. Wyra?
Yeah, I'm gonna piggyback off your Broadway comments. I've thought about that often, and it seems that the strategy thus far has been to funnel bicycle traffic onto Broadway and to encourage that. And it doesn't seem like that. It's definitely not the safest option. Might be the most direct, but I also think that warrants some review. I think that talking about this is just exciting in general, and it represents a substantial undertaking. But it's exciting to speak into the development and the improvement of our transportation network in Sonoma and within the sphere of influence. I love the plan as it relates to the cooperative engagement with the jurisdictions and all the anticipated events aimed at soliciting input from the public. I think that's really important. If there's one thing I've noticed in Sonoma recently, it's that it's the transportation-related issues that elicit the most strong reactions from people, but only after it happens. So I love seeing the outreach front-loaded, because I think it gives people the opportunity to, it informs people and it gives them the opportunity to weigh in when their thoughts can still have an impact on what comes to fruition.
Thank you. Yes, O'Neill.
Okay, now I can make comments and not ask questions. I want to echo Commissioner Willer's comments about Ramal Road. I think it needs to be a priority. The number one cycling route in Sonoma is down the bike path to Lovell Valley, to 7th Street East, to Denmark, to Burndale, to Dale, to Ramal Road. That's number one. And for runners also. And being a distance runner, that's my neighborhood. That's where I run a lot. And the roads are incredibly rough and scary. So I think that needs to be a highlight. And I want to tell a story. In July, I ran the Napa Sonoma Half Marathon. It started at Domaine Carneros, and it finished on the plaza. And when you crossed that line where it says Napa County, Sonoma County, there's 3,500 runners. The race organizers put up these giant A-frame signs as soon as you cross into Sonoma County. Wash your feet. That was Sonoma County. Napa's smooth. You get to Sonoma, it's bad. And so every time I go running out there and I see that line, Napa County, Sonoma County, it's really infuriating. And that is where most cyclists go. And they go like 7 days a week, and that's where the tourists go. That's where they're all going out that way. And in addition to not being friendly because it's not smooth, oh, by the way, 7th Street East is lovely now. There's no shoulder, and there's places where, especially during harvest time, where these trucks are just speeding by and you have absolutely no shoulder. Now, it's the number one recreational cycling and running area, and it has to be a priority, and because it is truly a gem and it's beautiful, but I really need to see that highlighted. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mary, did you have anything you'd like to add? Okay. Therese? Okay. Well, I've got a number of comments. I'm a walker. I walk 3 or 4 miles a day. In my household, my wife and I, we share one car. And that works out fine. But it also means it induces me to walk rather than hopping into the car, because sometimes the car's not there. And so I think that educating people about the benefits of walking in our increasingly obese and diabetes-prone population is an important part of any plan like this. We've got to give people reason to feel good about getting out of their cars and using other ways of getting around town. Bill mentioned the issue of essentially the walking aesthetic, and I can tell you, as I've gotten older and my hearing declined, last year I ended up getting some hearing aids. They let me hear the world the way it really sounds. I didn't realize as the years was going by that I was missing more and more. But what came with that discovery is that walking along Napa Street is torture. I mean, absolute sound torture. The big rigs and the sound of loud vehicles, I literally have to turn my hearing aids off because it's so uncomfortable. So when we talk about the aesthetic of a walking option, or for that matter, a bicycling option or any non-automobile option, the aesthetic is critical. I do what I can to avoid walking along Napa Street, not because I feel unsafe on Napa Street as a pedestrian. Gratefully, we have a very complete sidewalk system that goes the length of Napa Street. But the soundscape is miserable, just absolutely miserable. It is not what I consider to be a pleasant walking environment. I do it when I have to, but that's when I do it. Just as a matter of, for your notes on the plan, when I walk from my house on 5th Street East to El Molino Central in the Springs, which is maybe a 2.5, 3 mile walk, it's perfectly doable. And the sidewalks in the Springs have certainly been a vast and considerable improvement. I'm just so pleased that that was done. Although, once again, the aesthetic of walking along Highway 12 is miserable in terms of the sound. There is one spot that I feel very vulnerable in, and it's where the bridge is, as you're making the way from the Sonoma city limits up into the Springs. You go down a low spot in the road, and there's a small creek that has a bridge over it. They made repairs to that bridge when they did the sidewalk work. At this point, the only thing that divides the walking area from the roadway is a white line. There's no sidewalk that's part of that bridge. If I had my druthers, I'd like to see some plastic bollards installed along those white lines to further reinforce to the automobiles that are traveling that this is a pedestrian zone. And because honestly, I hustle my butt across that section of that bridge, and I feel nervous. I don't feel safe in that particular situation. And there may be other circumstances like that as well, where the pedestrian area has to be more visibly protected, even if these little plastic bollards that are basically just, plastic stakes that get knocked over by the wind would not really provide any protection from a vehicle. They nonetheless, I think, will incline drivers to be more attentive. I think another piece of this plan, which I'd like to see considered, has to do with bicyclist training. I think Mr. Conlon mentioned the people who come here as tourists are given bicycles by the hotels and then tool around town. I get the sense that a lot of them are not experienced bicyclists and don't really know the rules of the road, even on a bicycle path, which is a class 1 bike path and pedestrian path. So when I was walking home from the farmer's market last week, there was a woman and I walking fairly close to each other, ambling along as we pedestrians do, carrying our bundles of vegetables. And a bicyclist, 2 or 3 of them, came barreling down the path, didn't call out, didn't say to the left, didn't say to the right, didn't ring a bell, didn't do nothing, and almost ran the woman over. Now, her reaction was a stream of curse words and invective, which frankly would have made a trucker blush. But nonetheless, the bicyclist didn't hear it, didn't respond, and But it was a reminder to me of the fact that it's great that we're giving people who are coming to town bicycles to use rather than having them just tool around in their vehicles. But the city and perhaps the transportation agency should be providing some kind of educational material to the hotels that they give to people about the rules of the road when you're out there on a bicycle. And that ought to be something that's routine. It's the same with the bicycle rental companies. I don't know what kind of training or what kind of explanations they're giving to people when they rent these bicycles, but they should be required to provide some instruction about how you conduct yourself, what's the proper decorum when you're riding a bicycle on an area where there are also pedestrians. To me, that's essential. Once again, it's a matter of what does it take to feel safe walking around town. Well, if you're on a small street or you're on a bike path, part of that safety honestly has to do with bicyclists too, and feeling like you're not going to get knocked in the rear by a bicycle. I think that as a society, of course, we've suffered from generations, maybe almost a century, of emphasis on the automobile and building our whole structure, our infrastructure, our communities to accommodate the needs of the automobile. We're not going to be able to reverse that anytime soon, but I am really delighted to see a new emphasis on a different way of getting around and making it, as I hope, as much of a priority as it has been to accommodate the automobile. Insofar as 8th Street East, I do hope that there's an opportunity to create the Class 1 walking and bike path down 8th Street East, even if the railroad easement isn't available. And I don't know how wide that easement is, but my experience on 8th Street East, and I often walk along 8th Street East as a part of my circular route for my 3 or 4 mile walk, is basically I walk on the near where that railroad easement is in the undeveloped part of the road, which is basically weeds and undeveloped areas. And it looks very wide to me in most parts. So even if the railroad easement may not be available, there may be sufficient land there for a Class 1 bike path that doesn't use the easement. I don't know what it would take to avail itself of that, but that would be great. As to the blue blobs, I'm going to start thinking of myself as a blue blob for a while. Gratefully, the city has had a policy in place for as long as I've lived here that when improvements to a residence take place above a certain dollar threshold, and that threshold has increased over the years. Frankly, I think it should have decreased, but that's all right. It's increased over the years. If there is no sidewalk associated with that property, the requirement is the sidewalk has to be put in. Now, that sometimes irritates the property owners. There was one property owner who came to a meeting of the city council when we were insisting on that improvement, who threatened to come back with a gun and kill us all if we put in that sidewalk because it was going to destroy his mother's vegetable garden. So people can get exercised even about something like a sidewalk. Nonetheless, there are gaps in our sidewalk system, even on the east side, which is not mostly a blue blob. And I think that one of the other things that we ought to look at in our circulation plan and in general going forward is how we can get the sidewalk system completed, even on properties where the improvements to the home have not taken place and may not take place. I mean, on France Street, for example, on the south side and the north side of France Street, there are gaps in the sidewalk system. And I think that we ought to look at solutions to that. I don't think, while it's worked fairly well to have this requirement for the improvements, I don't think we have to wait for that. If there's grant funding available or other tools to mitigate the cost, I think the public benefit to the city of completing a sidewalk system in an area on a street where you have mostly sidewalk but you have gaps would be well worth exploring. The most dangerous street for me to walk on is East Napa Street from the city limits down to 8th Street East. Essentially, I walk against the traffic, which I always do on a road with no sidewalks, so I can see what's coming. And I don't know if sufficient right-of-way exists along Napa Street for that to be improved, but I would like to see the county make a priority of adding safe pedestrian access along Napa Street from the city limits all the way to 8th Street East. What happens on 8th Street East going forward, you know, we've already talked about, considered, but I wouldn't want to see an extension of safety to 8th Street East, wait until an 8th Street East bike plan gets codified and funded. There's no reason to do that, and it is really dangerous. I mean, there are some spots, particularly on the south side of Napa Street, when one is walking against the traffic, where you have no choice but to go out into the road. And it's really crummy. And then finally, one of my typical walks is to go to Whole Foods in that shopping center. And one of the pleasures of that walk is taking the pathway that was put in by the Best Western Hotel that goes from 2nd Street to 2nd Street. It's pretty, it's quiet, it's safe, it qualifies as a Class 1 path. It's privately owned, and there's a little sign at the end of it that says passage, you know, by permission of the owner only, but I don't see Norman Krug out there directing traffic and interviewing people. I think that as we go forward as a city, we need to make these kinds of paths part of our development plans for big projects. I don't think there is any big project that, for example, would cover a half a block or a block that should not have public access paths through them. And a good example of where this could have happened in a better way, although there are sidewalks, is at the lodge in Sonoma up at Leveroni. There could have been a public path from the east side to the west side of that property, and there isn't. You basically have to walk on the streets or on the sidewalks. So I just think that that these little shortcut paths as part of can't necessarily be a requirement, but as a consideration for development plans in the city would help and give the opportunity for some really pleasant walking experiences. So those are my comments. Is there anything further from the commission? No? Well, Taylor, I want to thank you and your associates for your presentation, and I share the other members of the commission's excitement in seeing a changed emphasis on transportation. It's been a long time coming, but I'm really delighted and pleased with the efforts on the part of the Transportation Authority and the county to invest their time and energy into this. I think it's a fabulous idea, and the generations that will follow us will appreciate it greatly. They may not understand all the work that's gone into it, but they will appreciate it. So thank you very much for your time tonight.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. With that, we'll move on to our next item unless anyone would like a short 5-minute break. We're okay? All right. Then we'll move on to the next item, which is 6.2, the draft climate action strategies.
All right, thank you. Jennifer Gates, Community Development Director. So This is a presentation that I am going to ask two of our climate action commissioners to talk about tonight, which is our climate action strategies. I will follow up at the end of their presentation with some of the next steps and how to participate moving forward. So with that, if Tom Conlon and Philip Heinerman would join us at the podium. Thank you.
All right, so this is why I put on my pants tonight. Let's see. So it's particularly great to follow after that discussion because we're all thinking about transportation issues. We're all thinking about the opportunity we have here. And as I've said to staff and city council the other night, just couldn't be more thrilled about the direction the city is finally going in. We've got new energy in the city, and that's quite exciting. I'm going to give you a little background on our Climate Action Commission and our approach to the work in front of us. We've been meeting since, I believe, February was our first meeting, but our first real substantive meeting was in April, where we came together and discussed our priorities. And at the time, we were focused on the budget process, but we didn't yet have a city manager, and so we're a little bit mixed up. But we've been deliberating for a while. What we now have is staff in place, and we have come up with 6 key action areas. Before I go into that, I should say that, of course, our goals are shared with the state of California. Collectively, we're moving toward 40% below our 1990 emission levels by 2030, and effectively net zero, which is interpreted to be 85% below 1990 by 2045, with the remaining 15% captured through carbon sequestration. In the county of Sonoma, every jurisdiction, including the city of Sonoma, has adopted a more aggressive goal than the state. We are working toward net zero by 2030, which is a very aggressive goal. So in the context of our discussion, and forgive me because I come at these because I've been digging into the greenhouse gas emissions work for a long time, it's going to be really hard to meet those greenhouse gas goals without major transformation in our society, and in particular in transportation, which represents 60% of our emissions here in the city of Sonoma. So we're working on 6 key action areas, our top priority being transportation, buildings, solid waste, water, and government operations, that is, of buildings and fleets the city has direct control over. And finally, carbon sequestration. Can we plant some trees to pull some of the carbon back out of the air we've already put up over our lifetimes? I'm going to briefly talk about the first 2 categories, or the first category, transportation. The categories which your commission has the most bearing on, and that's going to be transportation. Philip's going to talk about buildings, and I think Jennifer's going to fill in if I missed a category there. So obviously, in the context of the previous discussion, the need to expand bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure is critical. The way our commission is approaching it is to get people out of their cars. Yes, safety is very important, but we also need to be sure that we aren't just making the place safer, but we're actually changing the mode of transportation. And that does mean there's going to be more bicycle, pedestrian, car conflicts unless we plan for it, unless we build the infrastructure to support it. So that's what we're hoping to get everyone on the same page about, as we know we need to move forward. Another big category are the specific components there are this master plan you've just been presented, the connecting of the Sonoma City Trail to the plaza, the bike path to the plaza, a downtown bicycle parking, which has been expedited and is going to be happening soon. And then in the electrification of personal transportation, we're actively working on building out the EV charging infrastructure to the best of our ability. There's lots of grant money. Our sustainability coordinator is pretty well aware of this and has been working with individual property owners. We hope to move forward on that over the course of the next year, a couple of years. There's also, our commission has really brought forward the idea of some kind of a people mover, a circulator, a shuttle, and I've spoken personally with members of the business community, Tim Zahner in particular, who has indicated, they're thinking about this too, and they hope to have they have some ideas about where that corridor, where that mover could be. We'll be talking with them and with the rest of staff about where that might be most feasible. And then high on our list of priorities are two ordinances that have been widely adopted throughout the county already. The first of those being the ban on the acceptance of new permit applications for gas stations, for new gas stations or expansions of existing gas stations. All the jurisdictions in Sonoma County have already adopted such a ban, with the exception of Healdsburg and Cloverdale and us. So, this is something which is looked at as a way of saving staff time, because we don't need any more gas stations now that the state of California has told us that we're going to stop selling new gas-powered vehicles after 2035. There are no pending applications, so it's not like anyone's coming before us saying, this is personally harming me. We'll be able to get gas to fill our cars up for the rest of their useful lives. The second ordinance, which has been passed widely as well, I'm not clear on exactly the stats in Sonoma County, but I believe many jurisdictions have passed a ban on drive-through windows in new buildings. So we have a few of those in Sonoma. There's a lot of idling that goes on. And something that the city did pass as part of the 2016 Climate Action 2020 set of requirements is to a promise to look at reducing the state idling law, which is 5 minutes in a commercial vehicle, down to 2 minutes less, so 3 minutes would be the cap in Sonoma. This was generally agreed to by most of the communities around the county at that time. My understanding is that the city's not moved forward on the actual implementation of that, but that's something that staff's going to be taking a look at, I believe, in response to our Climate Commission bringing that measure back forward. So let's see, is there anything else I've overlooked in here? No, I think that covers it for transportation, and I thank you, beg the indulgence of speaking as long as I did.
Hi, everybody. I'm Phil Heinerman, and you don't know me, but you know Tom probably because you've seen him around. I'm about a 12-year part-time resident of the city. I'm actually have been practicing law in Philadelphia, and I was looking to sort of jettison the Philadelphia lawyer status that people keep saying to me, oh, a Philadelphia lawyer. And now I realize tonight that I'm part of the enlarging elderly population in Sonoma because I'm moving here full-time now. And while my partners are all moving to Nevada and Florida, I don't really want to see them much anymore. I'd rather stay here. And the surprising thing, of course, is that I have more friends now than I ever have had on the East Coast. Everybody says, by the way, I'm coming by to see you. So my background includes I'm a LEED accredited professional. Because of that, I have a special interest in buildings. Most people know that buildings are the second leading contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. And what we've been looking at are a number of issues, including probably primarily natural gas use. The EPA has identified natural gas, which is essentially methane, as about a third of the emissions in this country for greenhouse gases. And from the time you start up the gas stove until it lights up, you're getting emissions. You're getting emissions from leaks. So one of the things we're looking at is what we can propose as ordinance changes to encourage people to use electricity instead of natural gas. And you've also seen a lot lately about the health effects of natural gas in residential buildings, so we're taking a look at that as well. Absolutely, of course, looking to expand the use of solar in residences and in businesses, and how do we encourage that? There's a lot of money available for that, but how do we review what locations we should be at? How do we provide informational sessions to people about how to get funding to get solar installations? We're also looking at the use of microgrids, which is something that the state has been looking at for about 20 years now. Microgrids to essentially create communities where the power is all stored from solar and then used. And then what we've got to figure out in that, there are some safety issues that we're going to look at. Also, where's the best place to put them and where we're going to get the most efficiency. So it's been a great honor to be on the commission at this time, and we're certainly going to be in touch with you all and interface with you, and happy to answer questions. Interested in comments?
So just a follow-up for the questions. So the process moving forward is that I will be posting the draft climate action strategy document early next week. I was hoping this week, but I'm still not quite there. And I will do a push out to everybody, letting people know that it is available. We will also be holding a public community meeting to get comments from the community in early October. And then also we will be holding another Climate Action Commission meeting to actually look at the draft and maybe adopt the draft at that time at their normally scheduled meeting in November. That then would go to City Council for their approval. So just to let you know what those steps are, again, the documents will be available on the website shortly, and we will put out an email blast for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? I've got one if no one else does. Really, it's a question for Jennifer in part or largely, or perhaps in total. In the past, and I may be reaching way back, when we first had environment as part of any commission activity, and it was at one point combined with public utilities or something. In any event, the assumption was, and this was during the heyday of trying to protect planet Earth back in the 90s, there was a presumption that development projects applications would not only get reviewed by the Planning Commission, but the Environmental Commission would have an opportunity to review the plans and make recommendations to the Planning Commission if they identified issues they thought were worthwhile identifying. And I'm wondering whether or not we can, or if it's viable to return back to a bit of that discipline. For example, when you have a gentleman on the Climate and Environmental Commission who is focused on buildings and development and the strategies to reduce emissions, it might be valuable to gain some insights that many of us, perhaps most of us, don't have in terms of a specific discipline to be able to evaluate the net effect of a particular project plan in terms of its environmental impact. And is that something that we can look at?
So either commission can make a recommendation to city council in regards to something like that. It would take an actual change to the ordinance for what the role of Climate Action Commission actually pertains to. It's not something that we can just do. That being said, we do have CEQA with all discretionary projects, so we are looking at the impact on the environment. The other side of that coin, and that's part of where we are going and talking about ordinances and Philip's expertise, is that we can create ordinances that have requirements, incentives, especially around, remember they have to be objective at this point. We can't do subjective. Point system types, which is like the LEAD program that incentivize developments to take on specific environmental considerations, adding more solar instead of being solar ready, actually installing solar, installing more than required EV charging. Our state is moving in that direction with their Cal Energy standards and things, unlike a lot of other states. But I will let Philip finish that because he knows the best.
If I could. One of the comforting things is since the 1990s, the building codes have finally been changed to allow people to do things that they didn't used to get to do without a variance. And so this state and this community has been pretty progressive in adopting updated building codes that allow these things and require certain energy saving implementations. So what we're looking at is augmenting that. Yeah, it's nice to have a general review with somebody who's looking at a plan to say, is this environmentally conscious? Are they making all the considerations they should make? There's one thing you learn when you get involved in the LEAD program. There are now more advanced programs. Like one of the most aggressive is a program called the Living Future Community. And it's not only net zero, it's show me the benefits to the environment that the project brings. It's extremely aggressive, but we're learning through that you can actually build buildings that make the environment around it much better than it is now. So on one hand, you're getting improvements in the codes to mandate environmentally responsible actions, but on the other hand, every month, every week, somebody's coming up with new plans and new ideas. And you see this and you get really encouraged by human beings. We're pretty smart if we put our minds to it. And we want to make sure that we take advantage of that thought process as best as we can.
Well, I thank you for that, and I would ask, and I'm not looking for an answer tonight, but as we explore the potential for this, one of the considerations is whether or not the commission has the time to undertake a responsibility like that, or how broadly or how narrowly. For example, we customarily in large projects have, particularly if existing trees are removed, we have a tree replacement plan. Those replacement plans, if there is any consideration as to the tree species, is usually something that has to do with what the root system is and what the area around that tree can accommodate, because some trees don't do well unless they have enough root area, and then they buckle the sidewalks and do all these other things. I don't recall anyone discussing tree choices on the basis of which ones sequester the most carbon the quickest or generate the most oxygen through the respiration process in their leaves. And so there may be some little areas of these things that would be meaningful. And another area that occurred to me had to do with some construction options. In other words, sometimes a building can be built with steel instead of concrete. And concrete, if I understand it, is a huge contributor to to emissions. I think I have something, I remember hearing something about concrete, the production of cement and so forth. And even if these were just analysis and recommendations to a developer so that they could understand what the trade-offs are, might be an interesting thing for your commission to explore.
Yes, thank you for that insightful thought. I want to go back to Jennifer's really smart thing where she said that we are obligated to do these objective standards now. And so that's actually what we're trying to do at the Climate Action Commission, is to come up with the vetting and the procedural, the big picture policies that we can give to the Pros Commission, which now has the authority over that tree planting issue. And we are going to be meeting, I believe, with the Pros Commission to explore some of these sequestration policies that they might ultimately choose to recommend to the council to implement. Similarly, that's why we're here tonight, I believe, is that we are, we're looking at the building codes and the possibility of Sonoma adopting REACH codes. These would be the objective codes that are already drafted by experts that have all that criteria in them that you guys need to rely on, and that your I guess I should say your staff enforces as new applications come in. And so as the process moves along, as this Climate Action Commission's recommendations perhaps to pursue a REACH code are adopted by the council with obviously your input and feedback on that, then we'll be in a position to have those objective standards for you all to tell your developers, here's the list of things that we'd like you to do. And so it's clear to them so that we don't slow projects down. We don't want to slow projects down. We just want to be clear, and we want to stick to our objectives and our goals here in the city of Sonoma, which is we have set this climate action goal and we intend to meet it. Hope that's helpful. I'm happy to answer more questions.
If I can just, you mentioned something I'm really interested in, and it's called entrained carbon. And in building entrained carbon, and it's embodied in the construction materials, is carbon. And one of the large emission sources for greenhouse gases is off-gassing from concrete. And some people like to use steel instead if the cost allows it. But there are ways to use concrete with carbon infusion that reduce the emissions of the entrained carbon in the material itself. But building a building, it's like putting this rug in, it off-gasses. And the off-gasses for months and months if it's a new rug. And whatever chemicals you treated the rug in are off-gassing into the environment. And it's the same thing with a lot of building materials. So we may want to look at, Tom, what kinds of building materials we want people to use in Sonoma.
Okay, thank you. We should open a public hearing unless there's other comments. Matthew, is there anyone there?
There are currently no hands raised on Zoom.
All right, then I will close the public hearing.
Actually, there was one hand just popped up.
Okay.
Just right before. All right. Jenny, you should be able to speak now.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
My name's Jenny Blaker. I actually live in Cotati, but I'm the co-coordinator of CONGAS, the Coalition Opposing New Gas Stations. And so I was very pleased to hear the suggestion that Sonoma is considering or could consider adding itself to the Sonoma County communities that are saying no to new gas stations. As Mr. Conlon mentioned, all the communities in Cotati, including in Sonoma County, including the unincorporated county, have now signed on to ordinances to refuse to permit new gas stations other than Healdsburg, Cloverdale, and Sonoma. There are many reasons to do this, but the main thing is why would we be allowing the building of new gas stations now in 2023 when they last for probably 40 years and we need to be winding down the use of fossil fuels? It sounds as if there would be no need to consider any new ones in Sonoma County, in the city of Sonoma anyway. But there are also many other reasons, such as that all gas stations at some point leak and cause a lot of pollution and contamination to groundwater, surface water, soil, etc., as well as air quality issues, which impact human health and the environment. And of course, we also support the ideas that you're working on this evening to do with increasing safety and connectivity for pedestrians and bicyclists, but just not building new gas stations would be one more tool you could use to reducing future greenhouse gas emissions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else?
We have one more hand raised on Zoom.
Okay.
Woody, you should be able to speak now.
Great, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks. I was surprised when you said there were no hands because I had my hand raised for a while there. Thank you. Good evening. My name is Woody Hastings. I live in unincorporated Sonoma County. I am also, along with Jenny, with the coalition opposing new gas stations. I'll try not to repeat anything that Jenny already stated, although I support everything she did state. I also think it's great that you are working on putting together this plan. So kudos on that. I just want to point out a few things. One is that the city of Sonoma has adopted a climate emergency resolution. And, every jurisdiction that's adopted a climate emergency resolution, I think that would behoove that jurisdiction to do certain basic things, like in this case, halting the expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure in their jurisdiction. I think we should be clear. We understand this is not something that's going to, we don't argue that this reduces greenhouse gases. It's about stopping bad investments in obsolete fossil fuel and dangerous fossil fuel infrastructure. That's what it's about. Those investments aren't just on the part of the private sector. The city of Sonoma, if a new gas station were proposed and the city had to grapple with that planning process, that staff time, there are other sort of investments on the part of the city, and we contend that those are bad investments to have yet another gas station. And by the way, this is not symbolic. Every gas station that's been proposed over the course of the last 5 or so years that have been proposed have been surprises. We are fighting 2 active new gas station proposals in Sonoma County. Another reason why you really should consider doing this is it's relatively easy to do. It's pretty much a case of just eliminating gas stations as eligible or permitted uses in all your land use zones. So relatively easy to do. There are many examples, 6 other cities in the county itself that have done it. And Sonoma, the city of Sonoma right now is an island in the county that still says yes to new gas stations in a surrounding sea of no. And we think the right answer about new gas stations is no. So we do respectfully suggest that you really take that into consideration. So appreciate Tom Conlon putting that up there, and Jenny stating that. And by the way, the coalition opposing new gas stations, we were involved in some way, shape, or form in all of those jurisdictions adopting their ordinances. So we've got lots and lots of experience and data and information and examples and models and things that we can share with your commission and the rest of the decision makers in the city, if you so choose. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, sir. Any further, Matthew?
There are no other hands raised on Zoom.
Okay. I will then close the public hearing, public comment. Let me just say with regard to the comments of the last speaker, while the sentiments of the Planning Commission as to the prohibition of future fossil fuel stations may be of interest, this is a policy matter that would fall under the jurisdiction of the City Council. I don't believe it's a decision that the Planning Commission could make on its own. So it's a little more complex than just denying an application at this commission level because this commission majority has decided it doesn't want to have a gas station. It's really a broader policy matter that has to be decided further up the food chain, as we say. All right. Any comments from the commission? Ms. O'Neill.
First, I want to give you my thanks. I think this is really impressive, Tom and Philip, and we're really glad you moved to Sonoma full-time so that you can help us with this. I'm really impressed with the work that you've done and excited to see what we can do going forward and taking even further steps, looking at our building requirements and how we have them incorporate passive, if not active solar, etc. I recently went solar, and I'm so excited when I get that report that says that I generated twice as much electricity as I used. Winter will be another story, but for summer, I'm happy. And I also just wanted to point out something that I consider to be a big environmental issue on our periphery of our city, and that's the Smart Train LPG tanker storage in Shelbyville. They got rid of the trains, but now they have no revenue, and Smart is looking at the possibility of bringing trains back. And I consider that to be a huge environmental issue and just wanted to make sure that that was on your radar as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Willers?
Thanks, Tom and Philip. Let's see. I think the ban on the drive-through is pretty easy. We've already basically done it halfway. I think the drive-through ban on service, there's a drive-through service category versus a drive-through restaurant or whatever the other category is. Essentially, we can't have a drive-through restaurant in Sonoma. I do believe we still allow drive-through services, bank, that kind of thing. So I think that's that's not a difficult thing to do. It's a minor, like you say, it's a minor change in the use category rather than trying to write an ordinance specifically for it. Fuel stations, I think the last one that we built here was the Chevron station near Sonoma Market, or what was Sonoma Market, and then the last one we had applied for was the one at Safeway. And most of our zoning categories don't allow them in that as a use within those categories, most of them. Some commercial areas still have that as a category. So I think that while it's not it'd be, I think, and you may have an opinion on this too, it'd be difficult to simply ban gas stations within the city of Sonoma from an ordinance perspective because of restraint of trade, I think. You could eliminate it as a potential use within a specific zone and essentially zone it out of existence in Sonoma in terms of any new station. And then I have a question that didn't get touched on. There's a category here under water that says expand and modify the turf for grass program. I don't know what that is.
You mean cash for grass?
Well, that's why I'm asking the question.
Yeah, it should be cash for grass, which was
I'm hoping that's what it is. I just want to make sure.
Program to pay people to remove their
is that what it
turf.
I'll try to be clear here, I believe the term cash for grass is no longer in common usage in Sonoma. That has a slightly different meaning now. We use the phrase turf for grass. That we were worried about confusion because.
Well, you're talking about artificial turf?
No, turf being lawns as opposed to the colloquial term grass, which is often used now, has been used since my childhood to refer to an entirely different product, which is legal in the city of Sonoma. So we don't say cash for grass anymore.
Well,
as a program name, we say turf for grass.
Okay, and the cash for grass program was and I don't know if it's still in existence. The city would pay a homeowner a certain amount of money per square foot in exchange for the removal of a irrigated lawn or grass on a house.
Right, so we are talking about reinvigorating the existing city cash turf for grass program. And
Cash for turf program.
Cash for turf, yeah.
Cash for turf.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. You're looking at an old climate action plan draft.
Right.
There will be a new one with the correct terms.
I just want to make sure that we're not replacing essentially something that
No, not
produces
for-
oxygen with something that
Produces-
polyethylene.
Thank you.
no.
Thank you for
We're
the
not doing that.
That is not at all what we're
Thank you.
proposing doing.
That's all I wanted to clarify.
Great. And forgive me for the mix-up.
It's okay, we're all getting old.
Other than that, I think, I think there is a balance. I'm a practicing architect. I think there is a balance between the goals of building environmentally. Our house was essentially, it was a Green Point rated house, won an award at a time when Cal Green didn't even exist. And Green Point rating was the only thing that you had in the Bay Area. But there is a trade-off, and the trade-off is we do have a need for producing buildings here that are economic, that have an economic viability at a certain level so that we don't build ourselves out of a community, essentially, from a cost standpoint. And I understand, I know where you're going to go, Philip. I understand because I've been there. And I've had to do, our house is an all-steel building. It's an all-steel building because at that point in time, it was a commodity that was competitive with wood, but it also provided a 70% recycled material in terms of its content. But there was a trade-off for it, and it brought with that trade-off certain other economics to the building in terms of its cost of construction to make sure that it was environmentally proper. I didn't want to use wood because of its lack of longevity.
I'm probably out of order, but I don't want.
Hold on.
Okay.
I will reopen the
Thank you.
public comment.
There's a somewhat of a misperception, though. I understand what you're saying, but we need to make it clear to people that it doesn't necessarily cost more to build something that's sustainable. And the best example, one of my best friends built the first LEED certified residential building. The steel came from a closed Bethlehem steel plant, all free, come get it. I mean, so there's a lot of ways that you can do what should be done right and not assume that it's going to cost a lot of money.
Right. But I'm talking about the buildings, at an individual level, those are decisions that are easily made. At a commodity level, in terms of housing, and I'm talking about primarily housing because that's what we're looking to produce here. That's what we hope to produce. I don't think there's going to be a lot of large commercial buildings other than possibly some hotels. But the economics of that building, of those buildings, is crucial in terms of producing the type of housing that we need here. And so there's a balance between those. I don't think that housing should not be sustainable. I think it should be. But there's a balance between the goal of sustainability and the reality of sustainability. And I want sustainability to be not only profitable, but I want it to be the preferred direction. And so, codes can be manipulated or can manipulate the process in such a way that it directs traffic in an opposite direction. And I don't want to see that happen. I want to see it, I want to encourage it, and I'm sure you do too.
Yeah, and, but the point is that I've heard from many clients of mine that I can't afford to build something that's sustainable or green. And the truth is, it's not that much different now. The delta's not very high.
No, and
anymore.
the long-term benefit is substantial.
And it's that misperception that's holding people back from going the next step. There's also there are plenty of studies that show you that if you have a LEED accredited or LEED certified building, that building's worth more, and you can sell that for more money, or you can rent it for more money. On average, there was a study in Chicago that on average, renters were paying 20% more to rent property that has been LEED certified because they like the image. And I'm doing a lease right now. I was one of the founders of the Green Building Council chapter in Philadelphia, and I'm doing their lease right now for their new office space. And that's what we want. We want to be, we can't go into a space that's not at least LEED certified. So I don't want people to get the idea that it's routine, that it's going to cost you a lot more or even a little bit more to build something that's sustainable.
Yep.
Hey, thanks.
Okay, other comments? Ms. Nugent?
I have sold a couple of LEED certified homes and some on their different levels of certification. And it was actually very cool to learn about them. Really very, very interesting. And the thing about the LEED certified, that the perception is that for the average builder, it's cost prohibitive. And so they're not making that investment. And then for the buyer or the builder or the buyer, the homeowner, they really have to value that, they have to personally value that that's what they want. So, do we have, or maybe we can figure out, are there incentives for people to build a LEED certified home? Or maybe that we can encourage that, because the perception is that it does not pencil out.
Primarily with solar, because there are lots of incentives right now for solar projects. And so that's a good point, though. And I know there's a lot of realtors now that are getting green certified so that they can understand how to sell it. And but it does take people who have a value to that. You're right. Some people don't care. Some people will pay more. So, right.
If I could just add two more points, and good conversation. One of the protections in our state building code is that it must be cost effective. It must be determined to be cost effective in order for it to become part of the official code. So there are extensive cost studies done to address this issue you're very validly raising. Bill made a very good point that sometimes that process can be manipulated. And so he's probably seen that firsthand, and we endeavor to try and keep that from happening in our jurisdiction when we have enforcement of the code itself. Second point, with respect to the realtor valuation, and the comment that Philip just made, the buyers do value these amenities, but there has to be some way of them discovering that. And so one of the things we're going to be exploring further is the whole idea of how would you disclose the efficiency of a building so that the buyer was properly informed, and the agent could direct the buyer to the property that they might in fact prefer. And I'd be happy to talk with Commissioner Nugent about this independently, or there's a lot more information we can pull up there. Again, that's not specifically anything we're recommending tonight, but it is something we're starting to think about at our commission.
You also touched on something that Tom and I have talked extensively about. In Europe, for example, if you go to buy a house, a residential house, you can look at the listing and it has a little bar graph on the bottom of the page. And it says what the energy rating for that building was, that residential building is. And in the United States, we have Energy Star ratings that are really easy to plug in numbers and see what your Energy Star rating. Now, will people factor that in? In Europe, they found that people are interested if it's on an extreme. If it's a really pricey building from an energy standpoint, people stay away. So there are a lot of people we need to talk to before we'd ever do anything like that, I think, in this area. We're a long way from doing that, but it's being done in other parts of the world.
Okay, anyone else? If not, thank you, gentlemen. Been an interesting conversation. We look forward to continuing it. I think we have some ideas that need further exploration. So I look forward to hearing back from you through staff or in whatever manner you feel works for you, so that we can see the ways in which you can be most effective to this community. So thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to call for a 5-minute recess. All right, we'll bring the meeting back to order. We have one more item on our formal agenda. 6.3, our annual work plan. Ms. Gates, if you may proceed.
I will, and I will keep it super brief. So on August 17th, the Planning Commission provided their top priorities based on our existing fix-it list and our city council priorities for fiscal year 23-24. And with that list, staff has provided you the actual work plan, filled out some of the details, which is attached to your staff report.
Is this going to come up on our screen?
No, it's in your, attached to your agenda, or your,
No, I understand.
I'm
Otherwise,
sorry.
I'm going to have to open this thing.
sorry, I was not prepared like I was last time for that one. I'm not going to go through each item, but each item is represented here. We added whether or not it was a council priority. It amends the general plan, provided some summary comments based on the conversations that were held, as well as additional staff recommendation as far as the comments. The timeline per the conversation, we had identified what those current goals versus as time permits and also long term. And then whether or not it's already funded or whether or not we would do staff time or seek funding in the future. So with that, staff is recommending that you recommend that City Council adopt your work plan and provide us any other further direction from that. So with that, that concludes staff's presentation, and I am available to answer any questions.
Okay, any questions from the commission? Donna?
I have questions under the green colored table, the current goals. So with regard to the housing element and affordable housing lines, so under housing element, it says we need to fund it. And I'm just wondering if that will be a proposal by the staff to fund. And at the same time, under affordable housing, does the staff have appropriate time for proactive engagement of affordable housing? So for instance, if you did want to engage with nonprofits to identify sites or to help with, identify funding, do we have the appropriate staff time for that? Or would we need to put forward a request to actually have a head count for those two items, like coordinator?
So I am currently in the process of hiring a senior planner with a housing emphasis. So I do have that position open right now with that idea in mind, is that they would do all things housing and be dedicated to all the housing implementation measures, working with the nonprofits. So not just about identification, but also education. That is a big component of the housing element implementation. So partnering with these organizations as well on that aspect. There are specific tasks in the housing element that would require, such as the inclusionary, the affordable housing impact fee nexus study and the inclusionary housing fee. I think we just did one of the nexuses, but we actually need to still do the inclusionary, and it needs to be done by a qualified consultant to actually do that analysis. So those would be things that we would then recommend that we identify funding up for. In some cases, I may be able to utilize grant funding that we already have access to. It's just a matter of modifying that grant that we already have submitted. And some of these other ones, some of the code changes, those are ones that staff can do.
Thanks for being proactive.
Under planning area standards and the long-term goals, isn't that going to be folded into the general plan update?
So that would come after the general plan update, because the planning area standards are actually what we would consider the code, the development standards. So the general plan itself sets the big policy. So we would then modify the actual implementation of that with those planning area standards.
Okay, but this is an interesting question. given the relationship between the general plan and the development code, is the development code going to be developed in concert with the consultant or not?
No.
No. So the planning area standards will end up being the responsibility of this commission.
You, in the sense of, we'll go through study sessions and do all that, yes?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Anyone else with a question? No questions? Anyone have a comment?
I have a comment.
Mr. Willers.
I'd like to bring parking standards beyond to be determined. Only because.
Hold on just a second. Can we open public comment
Well,
and close public comment?
Thank you. Do we have anyone there, Matthew?
There are currently no hands raised on Zoom.
Okay, anyone here in the audience want to make public comment on our action plan? All right, close the public comment. Gee, I love this gavel.
back to my favorite subject. For as many years as I've been on the commission and talked in public, I actually, we spent the night here talking about bicycles, pedestrians, climate, cars, and we have parking standards that come out of the 1960s. And I've talked about that with this commission since I've lived here. And it affects development potential. It also affects how much land we pave over. And they really need to come to the 22nd century. They just need to get out of where they're at. And it seems silly, but for every additional square foot of asphalt we put on the ground, it's oil, it's aggregate that gets dug up, and it's surface area that we cover that has to be then drained to some place to be picked up in a special trough so it doesn't go into our creek system. And it's just silly that we still operate under these conditions without evaluating them. And we're going to move forward and we're going to fight with people about whether or not they have the correct parking stalls. So, many, many jurisdictions in California have moved beyond 10-foot by 20-foot parking spaces for a car. Many. And in fact, most. So that's just my last pitch, I guess.
Well, let's pursue this for a moment. I can't recall precisely by which method we decided what things would be as time permits versus another category. Could you refresh my memory as to how we decided that?
In a lot of cases, it was my recommendation, and then you guys said yay or nay on that recommendation. Most of the reasons why I said on the first grouping of the current goals is one, we're already doing it, or two, it's mandated either by the housing element itself telling us that we have to do it, or it's been identified as something that is moving forward, like the trees. Is a discussion that is moving forward. So that is the reason why, as time permits, was more of the, okay, these are all the things that we are doing right now, and if there's time to fill it, then we will bring these up. And the first one on the list was the wireless, which isn't compliant with FCC guidelines, so that was why it was first on the list. And then just started adding them.
Okay, so you are saying that within as time permits list, there actually is a hierarchy of sequence. In other words, are you implying that after telecommunications, the next item that would be accommodated if time permits will be parking?
If that one comes up sooner, I'm trying to remember what my order was in my list. I think I put them in exactly how you voted.
Okay.
Actually.
So perhaps we can codify at this meeting that in the as it pertains to the as time permits list, this actually is a hierarchical order, that the first thing as time permits we will address would be telecommunications, and the second thing we will address, if time permits, would be parking, as opposed to turning it into the fourth thing or the third thing. It'll be the next thing after that.
The next 15 years.
Well, no, I'm reading a book currently called Paved Paradise. Anybody familiar with it?
Yeah.
And, it speaks to Mr. Willer's concerns here, which is the degree to which we have accommodated the structure of our built environment to accommodate automobiles and the price we pay for it. So as long as it's number 2 on the as time permits list, I'm okay having it reside there, as opposed to our seeing if the group would like to elevate it to a higher status.
I would have the conversation of whether or not you want to elevate it to a higher status, because there may be an instance or something that comes up that we need to address. So I wouldn't want to promise that I wouldn't, let's say, vacant structures. If this becomes an issue in the community, I can't say that I wouldn't bring vacant structures sooner to you all, because there's a present need to address a situation. So I just want to put that out there.
Okay, well, I appreciate your accommodating the discussion. So let's see how the commission feels about elevating this topic above the as time permits list.
I have a comment. It's on our 2023, 2024 goals. It's identified, and I think, it clearly has a red flag next to it. So I'm okay leaving it because it's on the list, as long as the sentiment is that we bring it up as soon as we can, right? As soon as it makes sense.
It's been on the list for each planning commission that I've sat on. The first one for 7 years, this one now for almost 3, as it's been on the list, and we'll get to it. It's not sexy. It doesn't sell. It doesn't really do anything, but it has a huge impact. The amount of paving that we put on the ground versus the amount of carbon that we have to displace because of the heat island effect of asphalt is incredible. And so anything we can do to eliminate the square feet that we put on the ground is good, even if it's minimal. We add that all together as we build. And so, I actually think it's a relatively small task, and that has relatively large benefit.
Well, one more. Well, thanks for that history. I didn't know that. I assumed we were accountable for getting it done in the calendar
This
year.
is the first time we've had a work plan, so I will give Jennifer the credit for that.
Others? Yes?
I know we're staff dependent and you'll be hiring a senior planner and that will help, but I would like as a commission to commit to addressing all of these as time permits, including if it means that we do a second meeting monthly.
Okay, so you don't really see it as time permits. You see it as something we're committed to doing.
Well, I do see it as a priority, but the question is, we are still waiting for more staff to be hired and what the staff resources are.
Ms. Nugent?
So if we were to elevate it to the current goals, and create it, prioritize it, what's the impact of that in the current goal green graph? What's the impact?
So it would just be on the list. So as time permits is kind of where, if it's low-hanging fruit, easy to accomplish, or somebody else is doing it, then it's going to be faster to bring it forward than right now with my staff. I have one planner and a 0.3 planner. So that's all I have for all of our discretionary permits as well as building. So I'm just trying to be realistic that even our current goals will probably continue on into the next fiscal year as well. So even if you put it up, which it's up to you all, I still may not get to it this year, but it's going to be in there.
Well, let me ask you this.
Okay.
Because it's not something we customarily have done.
Mm-hmm.
What if we formed a subcommittee of 2 members of the commission, for an example, who would bring forward to you and to the commission a set of recommendations to consider these parking standards? Mr. Willers has characterized this as, I don't believe the exact words, quote unquote, not a big job. He may rue the day he ever said that, because I would nominate him for the subcommittee, of course, and he volunteers. So is that something we could look at? Because I understand you have a limit to your time and a limit to staff time. On the other hand, you've got a group of really intelligent people here who are willing to do the work. And we can't replace your staff, but we can be an adjunct to your staff when the expertise is there, and the time and the interest.
If you would like to work, I can put you to work. I've put our Climate Action Commission to work.
All right, well, you're just the kind of planning director we want.
Of course, there's always within limitations with what we would put, and then we would do ad hoc committees. I can come back to you guys, and after this is approved by City Council, we can discuss ad hoc committees to work on these certain topics, and such as the parking. It's not just planning, it's building and public works that would be involved in that conversation. So it's never, this is why I always say it's not always as easy as me just going to some town and being like, okay, that looks good, here you go, because I do need to work with all the other departments because it does impact others.
Okay, well, so step 1 then is to go to the City Council, and then once we've got the approval of the plan, then we can determine which parts, if any, we want to try to address with ad hoc committees to facilitate and expedite the process.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So, any other questions or comments about the work plan? Mr. Barbos.
I think Joni Mitchell sang a song about the parking.
Yeah, well, the Tree Museum, right? Okay, anything further?
I need a
Mr.
motion.
Wire? Mr. Wire?
I have a motion.
Okay.
I would like to approve a resolution recommending to the City Council to approve the fiscal year 2023-2024 Planning Commission work plan.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right. Matthew?
Cool. Commissioner DAMBACH,
Yes.
Commissioner Nugent,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Neill,
Yes.
Commissioner Willers,
Yes.
Commissioner WIRICK,
Yes.
Vice Chair Barbose,
Yes.
and Chair Barnett.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion carries unanimously.
All right. Thank you very much. Any comments or announcements from city staff?
Yes, I do. All right, so a couple of different things. The pros meeting occurred last week, and at that meeting, there was a discussion about having a joint meeting between the Climate Action Committee Commission, as well as the pros, and also with Planning Commission. So we would be looking to have a joint meeting to begin discussion about trees. And the reason why I say the Planning Commission, because you do the tree removal permits and replacement enhancements for development projects. So it is important that you participate as well. And I think it's a good opportunity to hear from pros. We are looking to change pros up a little bit, take the arborist off the commission, and actually have a consultant on staff as an arborist to help not just the pros commission, but also our commission. So that is one thing. The other is, as was stated, we have expedited bicycle parking. So we're putting in some installations of bicycle parking once they are ordered and come in the plaza itself, because we had some funding. And so you'll be seeing that soon. The other item is that City Council on Monday, at the council, they did adopt a resolution to create a task force, and that task force will consist of 5 representatives from the city and 2 representatives from the valley that will help with discussions around the general plan and not necessarily provide recommendations, but they will have discussion, and those discussions will be provided to Planning Commission and City Council through this process. And there are additional opportunities for the public to participate as well. Let's see, the first kickoff meeting is for the Planning Commission and City Council. It's a joint special meeting on October the 11th at 6 o'clock in this room. And then after that, the consultant will be leading visioning workshops on November 2nd and November 13th at 6 o'clock at the Vintage House. We will be mailing a postcard to all addresses and property owners within the city limits, and then I'll also be pushing out different social media as well as e-blasts to advertise those visioning workshops and hopefully get a lot of participation. Staff is also willing to go present at different organizations about this topic and take in public comment at that opportunities as well. And we are looking for opportunities to connect with our youth. So maybe Boys and Girls Club, maybe high schools, things like that. Lastly, the parking management plan was also adopted at City Council on Monday, and Phase 1 was approved, as well as to begin looking at Phase 2. Phase 1 is mostly focused on creating public-private partnerships around our private parking lots, as well as finding signage to those lots, actual enforcement, potential change in times will be looked at, maintaining the 3 hours, but increasing the actual times in which we enforce. And then as far as Phase 2 is to look at the beginnings of a parking district, so that the funds collected from fines would go into that parking district, and then Phase 2, actual implementation of any kind of cost associated with parking would go back to council at a future time. And then if it is chosen to move forward with paid parking, that those funds would then go into a parking district as well. So that is my summary of what happened at City Council.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any last comments from the commission? Ms. O'Neill?
I would just like to request that the water fountains in the plaza and Depot Park get turned back on. And I keep asking that. I don't know who the right person to ask is, but I'll ask again.
All right, anything further? Can I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Seconded.
Approved.
Oh, yeah.
No second necessary.